Welcome, everybody. Thank you for dialing in to today's webinar. We are going to look on how to avoid tunnel vision and, by doing so, move to a 360 perspective on truly sustainable packaging. Thank you, and let's get started. So before I go into the details and talk more about sustainable packaging and, of course, inks and coatings, just a quick introduction. So my name is Alina. I am the head of Global Sustainability and Circular Economy, and it is my great honor to be part of the Siegwerk team that is trying to transform the inks and coatings industry to become more sustainable. Siegwerk, a company, 200-year history, family-owned, and we offer solutions for packaging through inks and coatings, focusing specifically on circular economy and sustainability as the path to the future. We're a global company, so come and find us. You'll probably find us anywhere. So without further ado, I'm in a dangerous spot today because we are streaming probably for most of you either during your lunch break or right before your lunch break. While this is convenient because you can probably have something to eat while you're listening or fix yourself something to eat, it's nonetheless something I quickly want to reflect on. Because most of us probably do not want to have what you see here for lunch. I think we can agree on that. Unless you're 5 years old, you might change your opinion. But we can also agree on that what you see here as a lunch proposal is not sustainable, not from the inside and also not from the outside, if you think about the packaging. Now, luckily, probably most of you who are joining today are in the packaging space and probably also have spent some significant time on thinking about how can you make that packaging more sustainable. And maybe you're just beginning to think about it, so this can be a great introduction. What we have in our toolkit when we think about making packaging sustainable is circularity. And we've been doing this now for quite some years, and there are more and more actually success cases out there. If you go to the grocery store, you find many nice examples on circular packaging. Although, of course, our journey is far from done. But I want to urge us to look beyond circularity, to make sure that when we design for circularity, we also think about other aspects of sustainability. One of them is carbon. Carbon really has entered the packaging space and the sustainability discussions probably 3 years ago. But compared to other industries, we're still quite in the infancy when we think about calculating the carbon footprint and moving towards carbon-optimized products. So this is a fairly new kid on the block, but we still feel somewhat comfortable with that. However, there's more. Human health. In the packaging space, we often think of it as safety to have that packaging in contact with food, but also about the production processes. And with circular economy, we of course also think about the safety of reusing the materials after they've been recycled. So again, something we're used to and luckily is on the agenda, and we continue to work on it. However, there are a few topics that we as an industry haven't really looked at yet in that much detail, depending a little bit on which corner you come from. One of them is biodiversity. So looking at how can we keep our system diverse and hence healthy in itself. Water, of course, related to it, but what is our water footprint? Where do we contribute to water depletion? And lastly, human rights. So we think about our industry maybe being free of human rights issues, but I would challenge us to have a closer look, to really have a 360 perspective on sustainability and sustainable packaging. Depending on which segment you are in the packaging space, there are probably other topics that are relevant for you as well. So these are just examples. I want to give you a few examples on why it is important to expand the view beyond circularity. And let's start with something where you think, well, that should be an easy fix. Move to renewable substrates, move to renewable packaging designs. I mean, this is great. We've become less dependent from fossil fuel. But if we think about paper, for example, there might also be a risk of deforestation. depending on which geographical area you're sourced from. Why is that a bad thing? Because we lose that biodiversity that we need to keep our ecosystems healthy. And also, we actually contribute to climate change. So even though we have a renewable raw material, deforestation has vastly negative impacts on climate change. If you just think about the emissions, and you see the number here on the slide, that is caused by forest losses. And also, if you think about trees, they are our carbon sinks, they're our lungs. If we use them for other materials, especially in situations as you see here, we lose those lungs and it becomes difficult to breathe. And lastly, you have higher chances of wildfires. And this is really critical if you think about also our own safety. What is the solution? We don't have to be hopeless here, is know your source. If you switch to a renewable substrate, think about how is that material sourced, which geographical region does it come from, and does my supplier, for example, have certifications and is transparent about the sources. Let's move to another example, recycled material. Same thing as with renewable, great, because we want to make sure to reduce the reliance on fossil fuels, and also it's good to keep the material in use and in cycle. So what can go wrong here if we don't look at the bigger picture? Here we could encounter a human and labor rights risk. If you think about where this material might originate from, 20 to 60%, depending on which number you rely on, of material is collected by informal workers. And this then ultimately ends up in our packaging or packaging-related materials. And they do a great, great job when it comes to really bringing a circular economy to life, but they do so often under really, really difficult situations. And you see anything from child labor to modern slavery, and then to sort of unsafe working conditions, unfair payment, discrimination, distortion. And we make it a little bit worse, at least as Europeans, is we export some of our waste still to countries with a lack of a formal infrastructure where the informal sector then comes into play. How can we look at this? Because we do want recycled content in our packaging. Again, have due diligence in your supply chain. And also think of it really in the full life cycle of your supply chain. Talking about recycled content, the packaging in the first step has to be recyclable. I think we all know that. So, I mean, what can go wrong here? It's a nicely designed recyclable pouch. It's lightweight, great to save emissions in sort of the transport. But at the end of the day, this is a product of the petrochemical industry. And while it brings a lot of good to us, there are also quite a few risks. If you think about people being living close to these communities, often vulnerable communities. If you think about the amount of microplastics that are in our environment and in ourselves, we see potential risk for human health. And also, if we look at these types of packaging, they have the highest probability of leakage, meaning that, again, we can see effects on human health. For example, if you think about the food that we consume after plastic like this has leaked into the ocean. What can we do here? Well, again, know your source, and you're going to hear this a few times probably still today. Because while we cannot sort of rely on certificates when it comes to plastics, like for example on forestry products, again, still looking at the companies that they're reporting in the supply chain makes a lot of sense. If a company in the supply chain has a lot of public incidents on not equipping their machineries and their factories effectively, that should give you an indication. Also, on a more macro level, pushing for regulation that actually sets standards in this space and makes sure that we have a petrochemical industry that doesn't harm the humans. When it comes to the proneness of leakage, look at the infrastructure when you design the local infrastructure, when you design the packaging. So what might be a great packaging solution in one area, like this, a recyclable plastic pouch, might be a really bad choice in a different area where there's no waste collection. You might rather want to go for a more heavyweight product because the likelihood that the informal sector, for example, collects it is just so much higher. So always think about sort of the context-specific applications. Reusable. I mean, what can go wrong here? This is like the superstar of the circular economy in packaging. And it is, or it can be. But sometimes we fall into a trap. We think about reusable packaging or try to bring it into the market, but we still apply a single-use mindset. What I mean by this is that we either compare data points where the waste treatment of the single use is not included, and so the reuse actually looks like the worst application or choice in the system, and we just forget that our waste travels as well, not only our reusable packaging. But also it's a thing of scale and logistics. So of course you have to look differently at a reuse system that you implement. Distances matter in this case. What kind of product you store matters in this case. And we're shifting our thinking towards that. What is also really essential is thinking about how can we do reuse together. So single use, one company, one product, or one company, many products, next company, their products. That doesn't make sense in a reuse system because in order for it to be efficient, you need to use the same packaging as often as possible. And the numbers that you see on the slides, the use cycles for, in this case, a water bottle, a personally owned water bottle, you need to reuse it 50 to 500 times. This, I know I do with my water bottle that I own, but it becomes even more easy if you pool that water bottle and go away from sort of that individual ownership. So how can we make reuse successful? First of all, be critical when you see data that puts reuse down, because often it's sort of some comparing apples and pears. And also think about who might have paid for that study. And then when we think about introducing reuse system, let's think about geographic proximity. Who can we actually collaborate with? Because then there is a truly sustainable packaging suggestion in here. So I showed you a lot of complexities that come in when you actually expand in your view, which might not be surprising. However, it might be overwhelming. So what then is really truly sustainable packaging? Is it no packaging at all? Well, probably also not. If we look at sort of the hierarchy of packaging, packaging fulfills a purpose. So we do want to work at it and make sure that it has a truly sustainable offering. If you think about packaging as providing safe food, safe drinks, safe medication, this is nothing that we want to give up. Packaging is also convenience, and probably we don't want to give that up that easily as well. And packaging, not only for packaging nerds, can also really be a pleasure moment if you think about sort of unboxing experience for something that you've waited for a long time. So no packaging is not the answer. But I do think there are some missed opportunities that we have in the no packaging space. There's still so much over packaging out there. And this is simple to solve. So looking out for the obvious things. I would be happy if we wouldn't have any low-hanging fruits, no pun intended if you see the picture here, that we can optimize, but we still have them. And let's just fix them. It's not rocket science. Sometimes we also have a conversation on, well, this needs to be packed because it has to travel 600, 800, 1,000 kilometers. Well, I live in the south of Germany. We grow cucumbers. We have cows. They produce milk. Why does my food necessarily has to come from a place that is that far away? And then, of course, needs packaging because you don't want it to spoil so easily. So let's think a little bit more critical about the supply chains of food when we actually think about packaging. And lastly, missed reuse opportunities. And this can be from a consumer perspective Like if you buy something in a glass, you have a reusable packaging. It's great. You want to freeze a soup? Just use it again. You have your nuts that you want to store? Use it again. But also as a brand owner, for example, look at your packaging and see what is already designed for reuse, because it is, for example, in glass. It might be in the rigid plastic container. And enter those into a reuse system first before maybe tackling much more challenging redesigns of packaging. So there is still room for more or less easy fixes. So then what is the answer to truly sustainable packaging in this complexity, if it's not no packaging? Bad news, there's no shortcut. It is complex, and we will not make it around this. This is just a fact. With complexity, one really good step is to sort it. It doesn't make it go away, but it makes it more tangible, more accessible. So if you think about yourself as a company and think about what kind of other environmental factors and social factors actually play a role in sustainability for packaging, prioritize them, structure them, and that makes it more approachable, even though the complexity might not go away. And while I don't have sort of the easy answer and cannot solve the problem of complexity for you, I do want to give you a little bit of solace, and this little fella here is the first part of it, but also something more tangible. So the first thing is, you don't have to get it right, be perfect when you start. If you're good at circular economy, build on that and find something as a next step that you deem feasible. If you're in the paper industry, or paper packaging space, water is probably going to be a topic, and biodiversity is going to be a topic. If you're a recycler, then human rights in your supply chain when it comes to the informal waste management system is probably an issue, and something you can stack upon and really build your understanding. The other thing is, especially in Europe, we get real tailwind from a regulatory perspective. And while it sometimes is difficult for an organization to address all those regulations, make them your friend, because if you try to make a case to move towards more sustainable packaging, then regulation can actually help you. If there are certain things that are just not allowed anymore, or certain behavioral requirements, for example, in the supply chain due diligence, use that as a jumping off ground. And it gives you usually a pretty easy case to convince. But also think about regulation as something that you can use, for example, when you exchange data. So something when stuff is reported, when more companies have to report publicly, it makes your research so much easier. So look at regulation as a tailwind and try to use it opportunistically for yourself. And then some of the trade-offs that you might think will happen are actually synergies. For example, if you go into more due diligence in your supply chain and really understand where my product comes from, you might understand your supplier actually much better in other aspects as well. For example, innovations that they have for circular packaging. And you can actually come see how approaching this can create benefits on more than one aspect of sustainable packaging. And then the other good news is you don't have to do it alone, and probably you should not do it alone. Collaborate in this space, learn from others. What you see here is just a few of the examples that Siegwerk has in the collaboration space. And I can say that we really learn from it because others already went through the process, have experience, but also because learning together and structuring the learning process together is so much easier. And it also sometimes helps you when things get tough to have a group of people that have the same goal. So reach out to people who've already done it, to people where you say, and companies where you say, this is really something where I want to get to with my company, and understand and learn how they did it, and then collaborate on concrete solutions to bring to the market. So, while truly sustainable packaging might not be easily digestible if you look at the complexity, There is true joy in getting it right. Like there is true joy to having this for lunch instead of that ugly box with the unsustainable content and the unsustainable outside. With that, I wish you a wonderful lunch break, and please reach out for anything else.